January 21, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base, Quang Tri Province, Vietnam. The fog hasn't yet lifted from the red clay ridgelines, and the temperature hangs in that cold pre-dawn stillness Marines have learned to distrust. The air feels charged, like the jungle itself is holding its breath. Inside a sandbag trench near Hill 861, Private First Class Richard Doc Halverson, an 18-year-old corpsman attached to Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 26 Marines, cups his hands over a tin of bitter instant coffee. The metal vibrates softly, not from his nerves, but from the ground. At first, he thinks it's just another mortar probe. But then the soil shudders again. Harder. A seconds-long pause follows, and then hell detonates across Khe Sanh. A wall of sound smashes into the base as hundreds of NVA artillery rounds roar out of the surrounding hills. The first shells slam into the ammo dump, exploding in a blinding bloom of orange fire. A shock wave ripples across the base like a physical force. The sky erupts with shards of metal, dust, and burning debris. Sirens begin to wail. Someone yells, "Incoming! Take cover!" You can almost taste the powder in the air. Marines sprint through the trenches, helmet straps flapping, flak jackets half-buckled, M16s slung tight as they dive into bunkers reinforced with nothing more than timber, sandbags, and faith. The earth shakes under them as the next barrage lands, closer this time, walking its way steadily toward the heart of the base. Over the radio, the frantic voice of a forward observer breaks through static. "Red Dog 6, this is Bravo 2. We're taking heavy incoming, estimate-coordinated barrage from the north and west. Repeat, this is no random shelling." Because it isn't. From the cover of the surrounding hillsides, 3 divisions of the North Vietnamese Army, nearly 20,000 troops, have begun their assault on the 6,000 Marines holding Khe Sanh. Their strategy is simple: crush the base with overwhelming artillery, then tighten the noose until every Marine inside is cut off, isolated, and starving. Colonel David Lones, commander of the 26th Marines, bursts into the Tactical Operations Center as dust rains from the ceiling. He studies the map, enemy trenches, known gun positions, suspected infiltration routes. The pattern is unmistakable. The NVA are surrounding them, closing in from every direction. He mutters under his breath, "They're trying to Dien Bien Phu us." But the enemy doesn't know what he knows. This time, America isn't going to let a remote outpost fall. This time, the sky itself will become a weapon. Outside, Marines tighten their grips on their rifles. The red earth shakes, bunkers crack, and yet, despite the firestorm, the line holds. For now. If you're watching from the US, drop a comment telling us which state you're tuning in from. Like the video if you're already immersed in the story. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of the Khe Sanh saga. The artillery thunders on, but beneath the rolling blasts, something else begins. The transformation of Khe Sanh from a vulnerable outpost into a fortress built under fire. By noon on January 21st, the smoke settles just enough for Marines to crawl out of collapsed bunkers and gauge the damage. The ammo dump is still burning, spitting flames and detonating small arms rounds like firecrackers. Craters pockmark the runways, trenches, and supply yards. Yet the Marines move with grim purpose. They know what the NVA is trying to do. Cut them off. Starve them out. Break them. But the defenders of Khe Sanh won't let the base die that easily. Sergeant Earl Watson, a Marine squad leader on Hill 881 South, shouts orders over the ringing in his ears as he helps his men rebuild a firing position destroyed during the barrage. Timber beams are hauled up from the hillside. Sandbags are stacked with renewed urgency. "Dig deeper." "They're probing for weak spots," he barks, tightening the straps on his flak vest. And digging deeper is exactly what the Marines do. Khe Sanh's trenches, bunkers, and fighting positions begin to evolve, hour by hour, blast by blast. Engineers work beside riflemen, reinforcing walls with steel PSP planking, aircraft tires, and layers of sandbags stacked so high they become miniature mountains. On the runway, bulldozers roar to life. Seabees, under constant shelling, race to carve out new revetments, fill in craters, and rebuild landing strips that seem to take a hit every 20 minutes. One operator keeps the machine running despite shrapnel ripping through the cab's metal shell, refusing to yield even as medics shout for him to stop. But the true heartbeat of the fortress is the air bridge. Far above the burning ridgelines, the first C-130 Hercules descends through swirling clouds and smoke trails, its engines vibrating the air. The pilot's voice crackles over the radio. Khe Sanh Tower, this is Raider 2-1, attempting approach. Visibility minimal. Taking sporadic fire. The Marines on the ground hold their breath. Getting supplies into Khe Sanh is no simple task. The NVA have artillery zeroed in on the runway. Every landing is a gamble. Every takeoff is a race against incoming fire. The C-130 touches down hard, fishtailing slightly as shells explode along the perimeter. Cargo handlers sprint across the tarmac, dragging pallets of ammunition, food, and medical supplies off the aircraft as fast as humanly possible. One Marine yells over the roar of engines, "Move your ass. They've got us dialed in." Seconds after the last crate hits the ground, the Hercules powers back down the runway, its nose lifting just as a cluster of enemy shells detonates behind it. The pilot barely makes it into the sky. Khe Sanh lives to fight another day. In the command bunker, Colonel Lone studies reconnaissance photos revealing the scale of the enemy buildup. Trench work snaking through the jungle, artillery pits carved into slopes, supply lines stretching back into Laos. The NVA is preparing for a long siege. Lones turns to his staff. They want a siege? We'll show them what a fortress looks like. Above him, another barrage begins, thunder from the hills, signaling that the NVA intend to keep tightening the noose. But what they don't expect is what's coming next, America's full weight, delivered from the sky with apocalyptic force. If you're enjoying this immersive storytelling, hit like to support the channel. Comment where you're watching from, your messages help boost the video. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss a Vietnam War deep dive. By the morning of January 22nd, the NVA tightened their grip around Khe Sanh, thickening trench networks, camouflaging artillery, and positioning heavy machine guns to choke off the airfield. What they don't realize is that the Marines are no longer fighting alone. Because overnight, the Americans unleash something the NVA never expected. Operation Niagara. A coordinated aerial onslaught designed to turn the sky above Khe Sanh into the most lethal kill zone of the entire war. In the early light, forward observers peer through fogged binoculars from battered hilltops. Hill 881 North, 861, 558, plotting every muzzle flash, every movement, every suspicious thicket. Their radio calls paint a mosaic of targets across the valley floor. Steel rain, this is Bravo 2-1. Marking new artillery pits grid 846. Repeat, enemy guns going active. Above the cloud layer, F-4 Phantoms, 6 intruders, B-52 stratofortresses, and even Huey gunships orbit in silent anticipation. Then, with a calmness that feels alarming in contrast to the violence about to unfold, an Air Force controller gives the order. All air assets, commence Niagara strike pattern. Rolling thunder inbound. And the sky opens. It begins with a whistle, distant, growing, a falling freight train cutting through the air. Marines look up in awe as the first wave of B-52 bombs hits the jungle. 3 miles long, a wave of explosions so huge they shake the soil beneath their boots. The ridge west of Khe Sanh erupts in towering plumes of earth and fire, each blast kicking up a mushroom cloud that merges with the next. Trees vanish. Hillsides collapse. Shock waves ripple through the mist, flattening grass and rattling canteens. For the NVA entrenched there, it is devastation beyond imagination. Back in the command bunker, lights flicker as the ground vibrates. One officer mutters, "Christ, this is biblical." Colonel Lones doesn't reply. He knows this is only the beginning. Above the smoke, phantom jets dive, streaking low over the ridgelines to drop napalm canisters and cluster munitions. The fireballs roar across the jungle canopy, igniting entire tree lines and exposing hidden trenches that observers quickly mark for follow-up strikes. On Hill 861, Marines watch the spectacle with a mix of relief and grim fascination. Corporal James Weller wipes grime from his face and says quietly to his fire team, "They thought they were going to bury us in these hills, but look who's getting buried now." But even with this air power, the Marines know the truth. The NVA aren't breaking. Not yet. They're digging deeper, tunneling closer, preparing for something bigger. The air campaign may blunt the siege, but it won't end it. Night falls, and with it comes the eerie silence broken only by distant artillery and the buzz of generators. Marines return to their positions, shoulders aching, fingers numb, nerves frayed, knowing another attack could come at any moment. In the darkness, an NVA loudspeaker crackles to life from the jungle. "Marines, you are surrounded. You cannot escape. Khe Sanh will fall." But the Marines have heard this propaganda before. And after witnessing the wrath of Niagara, they know the NVA haven't seen America's final card yet. If you're still with us in this intense story, drop a comment saying, "I'm here." Like the video to support historical storytelling. And subscribe so you don't miss the next battle in the 77-day siege. February settles over Khe Sanh like a cold, wet shroud. The monsoon clouds sag low over the ridgelines, turning the world into a dim gray tunnel. Visibility drops. The jungle stinks of mud, cordite, and rotting foliage. And every night, when the sky goes black, the NVA come alive. Just after 0200 hours, on February 5th, the silence cracks. A single shot echoes from the tree line north of Hill 861. Sharp, deliberate. Marines freeze. It's followed by another. Then another. Each one landing closer. Lance Corporal Eddie Ramirez, manning an M60 machine gun, senses the shift. The jungle isn't just noisy tonight. It's moving. He whispers, "They're out there." Moments later, the night erupts. Green NVA tracer rounds whip across the perimeter, slicing through sandbags and snapping branches. Flares arc into the sky, bathing no man's land in a sickly white glow. In that sudden brightness, the Marines see them, dark silhouettes sprinting, crawling, and weaving forward with AKs, satchel charges, and RPGs. Ramirez slams down the butterfly triggers of the M60. The gun roars, sending a river of lead into the advancing shapes. Shell casings spill across the trench floor. Marines all along the line return fire, M16s cracking in bursts, grenades thumping, claymores erupting with blinding flashes. Contact front. Multiple squads. Someone shouts over the radio. On the far end of the trench, Sergeant Watson grabs a PRC-25 handset. "Red Dog 6. This is Hill 861. We have a full assault. Repeat, full assault. Danger close." The response comes instantly. "Fire mission authorized. Stand by for illumination." A mortar crew nearby springs into action. Their first parachute flare pops high overhead, turning the jungle into a flickering battlefield where every movement looks like a threat. Shadows stretch and distort. Mud sprays as Marines brace against incoming fire. Then the NVA hit the wire. Men in dark uniforms rush forward with wire cutters and Bangalore torpedoes. One explosive charge detonates, blasting a section of concertina wire outward in a storm of razor fragments. Marines shift fire, but through the smoke, more silhouettes push through. Corporal Weller shouts, "They're breaching. Hold the line." Two Marines leap from their bunkers, firing point-blank into the gaps. Another tosses a grenade that lands with a metallic clink before bursting in a violent flash. The NVA press harder. But just when it seems the line might break, salvation arrives. A pair of AC-47 spooky gunships, the legendary Puff the Magic Dragon, circle overhead. Their miniguns begin to spin, producing that unmistakable humming growl. Then the night turns red. Streams of tracer fire pour down like molten rain. Thousands of rounds per minute rake through the enemy ranks with terrifying precision. The assault stalls. Men drop. The jungle convulses. Within minutes, the attacking waves falter, then break. Survivors melt back into the darkness. Silence returns, slowly, uneasily. The Marines breathe again. Their trenches are littered with spent casings, shattered timber, and the acrid smell of burned powder. Corpsman Halverson moves from man to man, dressing wounds, offering water, whispering reassurance. They held. But the night has made one thing brutally clear. The NVA are willing to spend lives like bullets to take Khe Sanh. And the siege is far from over. If this section had you on the edge of your seat, hit the like button. Comment, "Still watching," to show your support. And subscribe if you want the next chapter of the siege delivered straight to you. By mid-February, the Marines at Khe Sanh begin to feel the true weight of the siege. Not just the firefights, not just the artillery, but the slow grind of isolation. The base has become a scar on the red earth, a fortress carved by desperation and held together with sandbags, sweat, and sheer will. The NVA's artillery hammering grows more precise. Their trenches creep forward like claws reaching for the base. Every day feels like a countdown. Every night feels like a test. Inside a half-collapsed bunker on the main perimeter, Corporal Weller rips open a C-ration can with numb fingers. The contents, cold beans and franks, slip out in a gelatinous lump. He sighs. This again. Private Tom Greeley, barely 19 and already looking 10 years older, shrugs. Man, I'd trade a month's pay for a hot meal. Or hell, even a cold one that isn't this. They eat in silence as the bunker door rattles from a distant explosion. The earth shakes. Dust rains into their food. They continue eating anyway. Hunger is one enemy. Fear is another. Far across the base, Corpsman Halverson moves through a triage tent constructed from torn ponchos and bent metal poles. Wounded Marines lie on stretchers made from ammo crates and parachute straps. The air smells of antiseptic, smoke, and blood, sharp, metallic, undeniable. A Marine grips Halverson's sleeve, eyes wide. "Doc, are they coming tonight?" Halverson doesn't answer immediately. He just wets a bandage, presses it gently to the Marine's shoulder, and says, "We'll be ready if they do." That's all that matters. Outside, along the western perimeter, Marines repair bunkers that have been hit so many times they barely resemble structures. Every shovel of dirt, every sandbag stacked, is done under the threat of incoming fire. A whistling shell lands just outside the wire. Boom, kicking up a fountain of red clay. Incoming. Hit the deck. The Marines dive. Shrapnel hisses overhead. When the dust settles, the men stagger back to their feet and keep working. They don't have a choice. Not with 20,000 NVA watching from the surrounding hills. At dusk, the fog thickens. The valley fills with a cold, ghostly mist that distorts shapes and muffles sound. The Marines call it the Gray Curtain, a perfect cover for enemy snipers and infiltrators. PFC Ramirez sits behind his M60, staring into the endless gray. Every shadow looks like movement. Every rustle sounds like footsteps. His jaw clenches harder with each passing minute. This is the part of the siege no one writes about. The slow erosion of nerves. The nights spent awake in mud. The constant knowledge that death is always just one artillery round away. Over the radio, the voice of a forward observer cuts through the static, tense, and low. "Command, be advised, enemy movement detected in the ravine east of 861. Could be recon. Could be prepping for another assault." Colonel Lones listens in silence, his eyes on a glowing map of the battlefield. He knows the Marines are reaching their limits. Supplies are trickling in, casualties rising, pressure mounting. But he also knows something the NVA do not. The U.S. is preparing a counterpunch powerful enough to shake the valley. Outside, night settles again. Fires smolder. The jungle whispers. And the Marines of Khe Sanh tighten their grips on their rifles, knowing the siege is about to enter its most brutal phase yet. If you're still locked into this story, hit that like button. Comment, watching till the end, to help the video reach more viewers. And subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of the siege. March arrives at Khe Sanh with no fanfare, just rain, mud, and the dull roar of distant artillery echoing across the fog-choked valley. By now, the Marines are gaunt, their faces hollowed out by exhaustion. Their uniforms are stiff with red clay. Their hands tremble, not from fear, but from weeks of sleepless nights and constant bombardment. The NVA intensify everything. Artillery barrages come in tighter, more accurate patterns. Their forward trenches inch closer to the wire, sometimes only a few dozen yards away. Snipers hide in cratered tree leans, firing single shots through the mist, forcing Marines to keep their heads down for hours at a time. On March 6th, just before dawn, the NVA unleash one of the heaviest bombardments of the siege. It begins with a low rumble from the west. Then the ground lurches violently as dozens of 152mm rounds slam into the runway, the fuel depot, the communications bunkers. The first impact blows a radio operator off his feet. The second collapses a section of trench, burying 2 Marines in dirt and splintered timber. In a bunker near the command center, Colonel Lones braces himself against the wall as dust pours from the ceiling. "They're softening us up for something bigger," he growls. Out on Hill 861, Corporal Weller and his men cling to their fighting positions as shock waves roll up the slope like physical punches. "Keep your heads down," Weller yells, though the thunder of explosions swallows his voice entirely. An entire section of sandbags detonates in a blinding flash. The world goes white, then black, then slowly comes back into focus. Marines cough through the dust, ears ringing, trying to count who's still alive. Through the chaos, Ramirez struggles to steady his M60. "We can't take much more of this, Sarge." Weller grips his shoulder. "We hold. That's it. That's the job." Then, just as abruptly as it started, the barrage stops. Silence. A thick, heavy silence that carries its own message. The NVA are coming. Through the swirling mist beyond the wire, dim shapes emerge. Squads, then platoons, then entire companies advancing in disciplined formation, stepping over craters and fallen trees. Their movement is eerie, almost ghost-like in the shifting fog. Halverson, crouched behind a stack of sandbags, mutters, "Here we go." At the perimeter, flares streak upward, hisses, pop, bursting into harsh white light. The jungle explodes into visibility, revealing hundreds of NVA soldiers sprinting toward the Marine line. Contact front. Engage. The Marine defenses roar alive. M16s crack in furious bursts. The M60 spits a steady stream of fire. Claymores detonate in concussive blasts that ripple across the valley floor. Mortars hammer the enemy formations, sending bodies tumbling in arcs of mud and blood. The NVA press forward. They reach the wire. One soldier throws a satchel charge. It lands short, shredding a section of barbed loops but failing to create a breach. Another rushes forward with Bangalore torpedoes but is cut down before he can deploy them. For 20 minutes, the world becomes a maelstrom of smoke, screaming metal, and raw human will. And then, overhead, the deep, rolling thunder of approaching aircraft. Spooky inbound. Make room. The AC-47 gunship banks in low, miniguns already spinning. Red tracer fire pours down in long, continuous streams, carving deadly paths through the advancing waves. The NVA falter. Break. Retreat. But the damage is done. Dozens of Marines are wounded, several bunkers destroyed, ammunition running dangerously low. The men slump against the trench walls, drenched in sweat and mud. Doc Halverson moves through the carnage, shouting, "Hold on! I've got you, just stay with me," as he stabilizes a Marine with shrapnel embedded in his abdomen. Above them, the sky rumbles again. Not artillery this time, but the distant engines of B-52s, circling, waiting for coordinates. And Colonel Lones knows. The siege is reaching its crescendo. The valley is about to transform into a furnace. If you're still with us in this brutal chapter of history, hit like to support the channel's work. Comment with you till the end to help the video reach more viewers. And subscribe so you don't miss the final turning points of the siege. March 10th. The air above Khe Sanh vibrates with a strange, unnatural pressure, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. Colonel Lones stands in the command bunker, headset pressed tight against his ear. His operations officer watches him carefully. They all know what this moment means. Lones finally speaks. Niagara 2, execute. With that single order, the most devastating concentration of air power used in the entire Vietnam War descends upon the valley. Far above the monsoon clouds, 3-ship B-52 cells, each loaded with nearly 30 tons of bombs, begin their run. Their engines rumble like distant thunder, unheard by the enemy below until it's far too late. At 0917 hours, the first strike lands. The earth convulses. A rolling wall of explosions sweeps across the ridges west of Khe Sanh. The blasts tear 100-foot craters into the jungle, vaporizing trees, pulverizing bunkers, and sending shock waves that ripple outward through the fog. Marines on the perimeter feel the ground buck beneath their boots. Corporal Weller grips the edge of his trench and mutters, "Jesus, that's close enough to knock the fillings out of your teeth." The NVA trenches, meticulously dug over weeks, are ripped open like seams in the earth. Camouflaged mortar pits disappear in clouds of dirt and flame. Entire hillsides collapse. For the first time in the siege, the enemy's movements slow to a crawl. But the strikes don't stop. Every 90 minutes for days, the cycle repeats. B-52s pound the valley. Phantoms dive and release bombs that walk their way across the jungle. 6 intruders tear open hidden tunnel networks with precision-guided strikes. Even Huey gunships swoop low to rake exposed trenches with rockets and minigun fire. Operation Niagara becomes a grinding, relentless drumbeat, day after day, night after night. And slowly, the siege begins to turn. On March 15th, forward observers on Hill 861 report something astonishing. "Command, we're seeing movement. Enemy is withdrawing from trench sectors west of the wire. Looks like they're pulling back." Colonel Lones doesn't celebrate. He knows better. The NVA doesn't retreat without a reason. That night, the enemy attempts one final gamble. Heavy machine guns open up from the ravines. Mortars thump. A wave of RPG streaks across the perimeter, exploding against bunkers and sandbag walls. In the mist beyond the wire, silhouettes advance, crawling, rushing, shouting instructions amid a storm of tracer fire. "Light 'em up. Don't let them close." Ramirez's M60 spits fire. Halverson drags a wounded Marine behind the trench line as bullets snap overhead. Grenades arc through the air. Claymores blast the ground into geysers of dirt. But this time, the NVA don't reach the wire. They can't. Marine artillery, silent for days due to rationing, comes roaring back to life. 105s. 155s. Even naval gunfire from offshore. The valley turns into a crucible of steel and fire. At 0322 hours, the enemy attack collapses. The survivors retreat into the darkness, leaving the field littered with bodies and shattered equipment. The Marines look out over the smoldering landscape, breathing hard, covered in mud and powder residue. Halverson wipes blood from his gloves and whispers, Maybe this is the beginning of the end." No one answers. But the thought hangs in the air. The NVA's last major push has failed. Their trench advance has stalled. Their artillery is dwindling. And the Marines, starving, exhausted, battered, are still standing. For the first time in 60 days, hope feels real. If this chapter hit hard, hit like. Comment, "Still here," if you're following this story to the finish. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment the siege finally breaks. By late March, something shifts in the valley, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The NVA artillery grows sporadic. The sniper fire thins. Forward observers report abandoned trenches, discarded packs, even ration tins left half-buried in the mud. It's not victory. Not yet. But it's the first sign that the noose around Khe Sanh is beginning to loosen. And the Marines know why. Operation Pegasus is coming. Ever since the siege began, General Westmoreland has insisted the base will not fall. Now he's preparing the largest relief operation since the start of the war, bringing in the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Marine Regiment, ARVN airborne battalions, and armored columns to break the encirclement. Inside the command bunker, a runner bursts in and hands Colonel Lones a coded message. Lones scans it once, twice, then exhales slowly. Pegasus is green-lit. The bunker goes silent. On March 30th, the first thunder of helicopter rotors echoes through the mountains. Chinooks and Hueys sweep across the highland ridges east of Khe Sanh, ferrying cavalry units into landing zones that have been the NVA's backyard for months. The air crackles with machine gun fire as troops hit the ground, fanning out through elephant grass and shattered bamboo. The relief column moves fast, too fast for the NVA to counter. Reports begin flooding into Khe Sanh. Enemy units withdrawing north toward Route 9. Captured trenches found abandoned. Minimal booby traps. Large NVA formations sighted retreating toward Laos. Corporal Weller hears the updates over a radio in his bunker and shakes his head in disbelief. After all that, they're actually pulling back? Ramirez slaps a fresh belt into the M60. Good. Let M run. Hell, I'll hold the door open for M. But the NVA aren't gone. Not yet. As the relief forces push westward, they hit pockets of fierce resistance. Ambushes flare. Mortars thump. Snipers try to stall the advance. Each hill becomes a fight. Each ravine a deadly gamble. Still, the cavalry presses on. By April 5th, the rumble of armor echoes along Route 9 as M48 tanks grind forward, crushing brush and shattered branches beneath their tracks. Helicopters thunder overhead. Infantry fan out along the roadside. In the fog above Hill 471, a Marine spotter suddenly sees it. A long line of vehicles snaking through the valley. Tanks. Trucks. Infantry. American flags flapping in the wind. He grabs his radio, voice cracking. Khe Sanh, this is Outpost 3. We have visual on Pegasus. Inside the battered perimeter, Marines stumble out of their bunkers, mud-caked, exhausted, almost skeletal. They climb onto sandbag walls, squinting through the haze. And then they see them. American troops moving steadily toward them, closing the last miles of hostile terrain. Halverson leans on his rifle, eyes watering. They made it. They actually made it. Weller laughs, a raw, tired sound. Somebody get coffee ready. We're about to have company. But the siege isn't officially over. Not until the first boots step through the wire. Not until Pegasus reaches the front gate. Not until the 77-day ordeal finally breaks. And that moment is coming fast. If you've made it this far into the siege, hit like to support the channel. Comment, Pegasus is coming, to show you're following the story. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment the Marines are finally relieved. April 6, 1968. Dawn breaks over Khe Sanh in a pale, watery glow, the kind that barely warms the skin but somehow feels different, lighter, quieter. The Marines sense it before they hear anything official. Something in the valley has changed. Near the southern perimeter, Corporal Weller steps out of his bunker, stretching stiff joints that haven't known comfort in 77 days. He scans the fog-draped ridgeline, expecting the usual ripple of NVA mortar fire to kick off the morning. Nothing. No thump. No whistle. No distant eruptions. Ramirez mutters, "Feels like the war forgot about us for a second." But the war hasn't forgotten. It's just arriving from the east, louder, stronger, unstoppable. At 0845 hours, the distant rumble of engines grows into a rolling thunder. Marines climb onto berms and sandbag walls, their hearts pounding. The fog shifts and thins, peeling away like a curtain. And then, they appear. M48 Patton tanks, their barrels blackened with soot and dust, grind steadily up Route 9. Behind them, columns of infantry in full kit. Hueys sweep overhead, rotors chopping the air. Air Cav troopers wave from open doors. The thumping roar echoes off the hills. One Marine stares and whispers, "Holy hell, they made it." Forward observers radio it in. Pegasus column is 600 meters from the wire. Repeat, 600 meters. Inside the command bunker, Colonel Lones nods, jaw tight. He knows the psychological weight of this moment. For weeks, he's told his Marines that relief would come, that the world hadn't abandoned them. Now, the proof is rolling up the hill. At the perimeter gate, a platoon of exhausted mud-covered Marines stands waiting. Their uniforms hang loose on their frames. Their faces are hollow. Their helmets dented. But their eyes, those eyes still burn. A young lieutenant in the relief column approaches, flanked by cavalry troopers. He stops before the Marines, salutes sharply, and says, "Gentlemen, Khe Sanh is relieved." For a long moment, no one speaks. Then Weller lets out a rasping laugh that dissolves into something close to a sob. Ramirez drops to a knee, overwhelmed. Halverson grips the gate post as emotion overtakes him, the weight of 77 days crashing down all at once. Some Marines cheer. Some cry. Some simply stand there, stunned. Because the siege, one of the fiercest, bloodiest, most unrelenting battles of the war, is finally broken. As relief troops pour inside the perimeter, shaking hands, slapping backs, and exchanging cigarettes, they see what survival looks like. Cratered bunkers held together with rusted wire. Collapsed trenches still smoking. Ammo crates used as furniture. Helmets with shrapnel scars. Faces that haven't smiled in months. A cavalry sergeant looks around and says quietly, almost reverently, "You boys turned this place into a fortress." And he's right. Khe Sanh didn't just hold. It endured. It became a symbol the NVA never expected. A fortress carved from mud, fear, fire, and Marine stubbornness. As helicopters thump overhead and relief forces flood into the valley, Colonel Lones stands atop a bunker, cigarette in hand. The smoke curls into the morning air as he watches his men, alive, battered, unbroken. He exhales and mutters to himself, "You held the hill. That's what matters." The 77-day nightmare is over. But the legacy of Khe Sanh, what it cost, what it proved, will echo for decades. If you followed this journey all the way through, hit like to support the channel. Comment, "Khe Sanh endured," if you felt this story. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into Vietnam War history. April 8, 1968. 2 days after the relief of Khe Sanh, the valley lies in a strange, uneasy quiet. Not peace. Peace has no place here, but the silence that follows exhaustion, as if the land itself is trying to breathe again after months of fire. The smell of smoke lingers. Craters stretch for miles. Churned red mud covers everything like a second skin. The Marines who survived the siege move slowly now, not because of wounds, but because their bodies haven't yet remembered what it feels like to live without expecting incoming fire at any second. On Hill 861, Corporal Weller sits on a broken ammo crate, staring across the landscape he fought for. The jungle is nothing but ash and shattered timber. In the valley below, the relief forces continue clearing out NVA weapons pits, tunnel entrances, and abandoned trench networks. Ramirez approaches, dropping beside him with a grunt. "You think they'll rebuild all this?" Weller shakes his head. "Not this. Places like Khe Sanh weren't built to last. Only the people were." Nearby, Doc Halverson closes the flap of a medical tent. The interior is finally empty, no more wounded carried in under fire, No more triage under shelling. No more whispered questions from Marines afraid to die in the dark. He steps out into the light, blinking as if he hasn't seen daylight in years. A cavalry officer walks up the ridgeline, taking in the shattered bunkers and charred landscape. "How the hell did you hold this?" he asks softly. Halverson answers without looking at him. "We didn't have a choice." That truth hangs over the valley like fog. For 77 days, 6,000 Marines faced nearly 20,000 NVA troops. They endured more than 100,000 rounds of artillery, constant assaults, starvation rations, freezing nights, and a trench system creeping closer every hour. They held because the alternative was unthinkable. As Route 9 opens fully for the relief convoys, the Marines begin to move out, some to new positions, some to medical evacuation, some simply walking the perimeter one last time as if saying goodbye to a place that almost killed them. Colonel Lones climbs onto a small rise overlooking the entire base. The wind is cold. His uniform is crusted with dirt. But his posture is straight, his eyes steady. He surveys the valley, the ridges, the trenches, the pockmarked runway, the distant mountains where the enemy once hid, and murmurs. This wasn't just a base. It was a message. And he's right. Khe Sanh becomes a symbol of endurance, of stubbornness, of American firepower, and of the terrible weight of war. The North Vietnamese expected the base to fall. They expected a victory like Dien Bien Phu. Instead, they found a garrison that refused to die. The Marines turned Khe Sanh into a fortress. Then they turned that fortress into a testament. As helicopters lift off carrying the first departing units, the valley grows smaller beneath them, just a scar of red earth surrounded by smoky hills. Weller watches from the ramp of a CH-46, helmet in his lap. "We lived through it, man," he whispers. Ramirez nods. "Yeah, but we'll be carrying this place forever." Halverson sits beside them, eyes distant. The siege is over. The war is not. But for the men who survived Khe Sanh, nothing will ever feel quite the same. If this story moved you, like the video to support the channel. Comment where you're watching from. Your engagement keeps these histories alive. Subscribe so you never miss another Vietnam War deep dive.